beginnings of collecting commissioner position insignia. This is something I got into just a handful of years ago. When I was at Wood Badge in 2015, I was having a chat with our course chaplain, who was, in addition to being on staff that year, he was an assistant district commissioner in our district and was also our district religious emblems chair. And at the time, I was a chartered org rep. And as we got to chatting about my scouting background and my experience both as a youth and then as a newer adult leader, he just kind of looked at me and said, "You know what? You'd make a really good unit commissioner." And little did I know that would not only lead me to to now a little over 6 years of fun and adventure and a handful of headaches, but also lead me to a different aspect of collecting in looking at position insignia for commissioners. So just a few things. Johnny talked a little bit last week about presenters not needing to worry about this being a whole collection to show off. And this really is a work in progress. I started small and I've branched out. And so you're going to see positions that are local. I haven't gotten into collecting area or region or national positions regarding commissioners. I've also only gotten into collecting the round patches. So we're going to be looking at 1953 to present day. And there are holes that you're going to see in some of these pictures. It's because I just don't have the patch. I'm still looking for them and just haven't gotten around to filling that hole in the collection yet. And so far I've stayed kind of standard with things. There are some councils that do some interesting things with their commissioner service. I haven't gone after all of those local issues. I haven't gone after the zone commissioner, which was a concept used by the LDS units a number of years ago. But that will be something that I look at as this collection continues to expand. Some of the basics that you're going to see in these patches. The commissioner patch has this Wreath of Service. It was introduced in the mid-teens, I want to say around 1913. If I remember the dates correctly, where the position patch now has a laurel wreath around it. And early on, you looked at the colors of the patch. And when you look at a commissioner patch from early on, before you had the name of the position on there, you looked at the background and the thread colors with things. So you're going to see a lot of patches where there is a blue background on what is referred to as the badge. The first class badge was what was used at that time. Over time, some of these position names have changed, and you're going to see that reflected in the patch and in how it's referred to by people who track this kind of thing. In 1953, you didn't have a unit commissioner. You had a neighborhood commissioner. You had a scout commissioner, which would now be your council commissioner. So things have changed over time, and you see that in some of these positions once they start introducing names onto patches in the late 60s. Some of these positions, they didn't stick because there were different structures that were proposed at the time for how to organize your council and your districts, and some of them, some of those structures were tried and just they didn't stick. So some of those positions were specific to that structure, and so you don't see them now. And you will also see that the badge that's used on commissioner patches moves from being a first class badge early on to being a tenderfoot badge for a number of decades, and now has moved back to being the first class badge there on the patch. When you look at the thread on these, and this will make a lot more sense once you actually start seeing the pictures of the patches, you use the colors of the wreath, the outline of the badge, and the eagle to figure out what position you're actually looking at. And this is particularly necessary for anything that was before 1969, as I recall. And then it's also used again in the current commissioner patches as well. Things are all gold. There's your neighborhood or unit commissioner. Gold wreaths are positions that stayed within the district. Silver wreaths indicate somebody who's serving at the council level. And the other ones, it's just easier to see it. But there's a chart if you ever really want to refer back to it. So now what we've actually come here to see is actually see some of these patches. So the first round commissioner position insignia patches came out in 1953. And this particular cut edge design was used until 1966. You have 4 positions here. In the top left, your neighborhood commissioner, again, the gold wreath, the gold outline of the badge, and the gold eagle. To its right, in the top right corner, that would have been your assistant deputy scout commissioner, or what you would refer to now as an assistant district commissioner. A silver outline on the badge, but still a gold wreath and a gold eagle. The bottom left, your district commissioner or your deputy scout commissioner back then. The bottom right, your scout commissioner now your council commissioner. Use the first class badge there in the center of the patch, but no names. That's why the thread color mattered, is so that you knew what position that person was serving in. We see that same pattern as we look at the first rolled edge variety, which were used from 1969 to 1972. They did add a fifth position here, and this is the first time that you have an assistant council commissioner. The type 1 of the assistant council commissioners from this time period, that's a hole in my collection. But if it were there, you would see it, a silver wreath, a gold outline, and a silver eagle. When we get into the 70s, 1970 to 1972, they started transitioning to patches that had the name of the position on there. Once you had the name of the position on there, you didn't need to really distinguish with the thread coloring. As you look at these from this era, you're going to see that they're all gold wreaths, gold fleur-de-lis, brown eagles with a red, white, and blue shield on the chest of the eagle. And now you can denote who's who by the word on the patch. Here are some of the positions then. Up in the top left corner, you have the 5 more traditional commissioner patches for the structure that we are familiar with nowadays. It was still the neighborhood commissioner at this time. There are some that were used closer to 1972 where they moved away from having it say neighborhood commissioner to where it said troop or pack commissioner. And so those patches are out there. There are also, this time period also introduced a position patch for your roundtable commissioners. And so here we see a roundtable commissioner, an assistant roundtable commissioner, a cub roundtable commissioner. There is also a scout roundtable commissioner patch out there. And then there are some patches out there that I've seen pictures of, but haven't ever gotten my hands on, that utilized an alternative structure for how commissioners would work within a district. And we'll see some of those varieties as we get into our red background patches. But for these 2 years, they used a blue background, which I've always thought was kind of cool. Does make it very easy to identify when that patch was from, because there's only that span of 3 years of when it would have been in current use. Now we take a jump. 1972 to 2009, they use a red background. When you're trying to identify when this patch may have been used, you have a pretty large span of time, but the name on the patch can help narrow that down a little bit. Here we have the introduction of the unit commissioner. There are varieties out there with the red background that still indicate a neighborhood commissioner, which would have been still back in the early 70s before unit commissioner came into play in the later 70s. You have some of the mylar bordered patches that indicated a person was, had been trained in their position. 2 down here, the assistant council commissioner and the council commissioner were the 2 that were out there for commissioners. There weren't varieties like that for the district level commissioner positions. If you look off to the right, the bottom right corner, there are 4 there: a troop commissioner, a pack commissioner, and then your district scout commissioner and district cub commissioner. Those were available in the mylar for the structure that utilized those positions. Above them, you have, I guess, the standard variety, for lack of a better phrase, of 3 of those positions. I'm still trying to put my hands on a troop commissioner with the gold border as opposed to the silver mylar, but those patches did all exist at that point. You also had district assistant Cub Scout commissioner and district assistant scout commissioner that worked in that period of time that didn't have the, at least from what I've heard and seen, didn't have the silver mylar options, but the district scout commissioner and district Cub Scout commissioner did.
Just a question: what's the difference between a pack commissioner and a district Cub Scout commissioner?
So a pack commissioner would be more along the lines of a unit commissioner. There was a structure that was proposed, if I'm remembering the history correctly, in the 80s, where instead of routing all of your commissioner staff through a district commissioner, you had really program specific commissioners. So you would have a troop commissioner that's focused specifically on working with troops. They would report to a district scout commissioner who would report to your district scout program chair, as opposed to reporting to a district commissioner. And the same thing along the pack side. You would have a pack commissioner that would specifically work with Cub Scout packs, report to your district Cub Scout commissioner who reported to your district Cub Scout program chair. And so that's where those were used, and kind of the difference there. I will say that, in trying to figure out how all of this worked, at the end, there are a couple resources that I put in here. And there was a website that had a document specifically that talked about the first 100 years of the commissioner service, did address that alternative structure and actually showed an org chart of how that would have looked and
a
how it would have
hierarchy
worked.
of patches. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so it showed the structure of how it was. And so I was able to say, all right, so that would, put this patch here and this patch there and this patch there in that structure. In this move to the red patches in 1972, they also had continued with the idea of having roundtable patches. And so what we see are a couple of the varieties of the roundtable patches that are out there. You initially had your Cub Roundtable Commissioner, your Scout Roundtable Commissioner, your Varsity Huddle Commissioner. Later on in 1998, they introduced the Venturing Roundtable Commissioner because venturing wasn't a thing until 1998. It was in 91 where they actually moved from calling it a Cub Roundtable Commissioner to calling it a Cub Scout Roundtable Commissioner. Same with the Scout Roundtable and Boy Scout. They put the whole name of the program into that patch. Most of these, as you can see, they have a background behind the fleur-de-lis that is specific to the color of the program. There is the one exception with the Cub Scout Roundtable in the top right corner. For some reason, that variety did not have a blue background to it. There is allegedly also one like that for the Varsity Huddle. I've not seen it. I've just seen it listed in Mitch Reese's book. There was also a few years where the Varsity Huddle was given a tan patch instead of looking like a standard commissioner patch. It now looks like any other varsity leader that's out there with the tan background and just the tenderfoot badge on there and the green lettering. You also have your roundtable staff, and a lot of this was the same. You have your background with the color for your program. It just says staff instead of commissioner. You'll notice that on the far right, there is a Boy Scout Roundtable and a Varsity Huddle staff position patches where they removed the wreaths. That was in 1995 and 1996. There's also a Cub Scout one, which I've found one and it is in the mail to me right now. But yeah, they took the wreath off for a couple of years because they decided, well, these are just staff positions. They're not really commissioners. And then they changed their mind and they went right back in 1997, put the wreath back onto the patch, and it stayed there until they stopped making those patches. Again, you still have the matching Varsity Huddle staff patch. Looks like that Varsity Huddle commissioner patch. And there, of course, is no variety of the Venturing Roundtable staff patch without the wreath because venturing came after they put the wreath back onto the roundtable staff patch. We then move into our BSA Centennial year in 2010. And this is where they decided to go back to using the first class badge on the commissioner position patch. They left the name of the commissioner on there. They're using the same design for all of the patches, but you're going back now to the thread patterns having a meaning to them. There is a slight change between the historical assistant council commissioner patch and the current one. It utilized, again, that silver eagle historically. Now it's utilizing a gold eagle. But the other patches, that pattern that was used before 1970 is now back in use here. You also now have your roundtable commissioner and roundtable staff patches. They each use that gold wreath with the gold eagle and a silver badge outline. Here you see all of the local positions with the exception of the Varsity Scout Huddle staff patch. The other thing about this time frame, all the patches had 1910 to 2010 on there. That was, made it unique for that centennial year. And they were cool enough patch and went over well enough that they kept the design moving forward. And so these are, you walk into your council scout shop, this is what you're going to find when you look for a position patch for a commissioner. $4 will get you that patch if you go onto the BSA's scout shop website. Still using that first class badge, still using that same thread color pattern, and also keeping the position names on there and keeping that same pattern with our roundtable patches as well. Most of them here. A couple of the things to keep in mind with this change of the design for roundtable commissioners is that they got rid of the background color that denotes what program you're in. That's really the biggest change between those other red background roundtable patches and the current ones. They did also, with the change of moving from program name of Boy Scouts to being moved to Scouts BSA, there is a new roundtable commissioner patch for a Scouts BSA roundtable commissioner. It's there in the bottom right. And they also reintroduced the assistant roundtable commissioner there in the top right. Now, one thing that I've done to keep track of all of this, because there's a lot to keep track of, is I took the listings in Mitch Reese's book and just mapped it all out in a spreadsheet. Because if I didn't do this, I would lose track and I would end up with 12 of the same type of patch because that's just my luck with things. So to avoid that, listed them all out in a spreadsheet, color coded them between what I have, what I had a line on, and what I haven't started to go after yet. But that's just one way that I've found to help keep track of everything. I did mention that there were some resources that I use. Like I said, Mitch Reese's book, A Guide to Dating and Identifying Boy Scouts of America Badges, Uniforms, and Insignia. I have his most recent edition of that. That helped a lot, especially in putting together that spreadsheet and realizing that there were varieties of things that I didn't know about. Craig Murray's website, he has a page specifically about commissioner badges from 1911 to 2010. And then he has some documents on there, one of them being the history and evolution of commissioner insignia. All of those have really helped me as I've looked at what is out there to collect, not only the things that I've already started collecting, but the things that, as I continue to go backwards in this collection, the things that I have to look forward to trying to find.